Hey everyone, welcome to the Gig Roots podcast, where we discuss grassroots economics in America. Each episode, we speak with the people who are working toward community transformation at the grassroots level. Let's go. Okay, let's talk about the gig economy for a second. We all know at this point what the gig economy essentially is, but what do we know about how it actually operates? As of 2018, the gig economy comprised roughly 36% of the workforce. That's about 57 million American workers. Many of these folks have to trade off job flexibility for things like relatively low pay and lack of benefits. Melissa Strawn runs an online platform called MyPeopleNow. She says it was initially designed to help gig workers find new opportunities, but she's now discovering how much gig workers are some of the most vulnerable to market instability. Melissa wants to do more. She hopes to create better options and resources for folks operating in the gig economy, and this starts with better employer engagement and, of course, helping freelancers survive during the ongoing pandemic. At Gig Roots, we think the freelance economy can be the most beneficial to the self-employed. That is, we see many gig workers who can leverage the marketplace to create new opportunities for business. But the research isn't quite there yet. One thing's for certain. When it comes to the future of work, having more than one source of income is going to be critical for most American households. Here's Melissa. I'm here with Miss Melissa Strawn. How are you, Melissa?
I'm doing great. How are you, Ethan?
Doing well, and it's good to see you. Good to talk with you again.
Yeah.
So we've had just a handful of conversations so far. So just getting to know you. Can you tell me more about My People Now? Can you just explain what that is?
Yeah. So My People Now began as a gig economy platform. So, I came up with the idea about 11 years ago before the gig economy became what it is today.
Right.
And so it still is that, basically an instant web presence for freelancers and gig workers. But then it's also morphed into an employee engagement platform that can help employees connect over side passions. And just because I think it's important to throw in there that my ultimate goal with this is to help people essentially find their path out of poverty or out of reliance on social services in an effort to find self-sufficiency doing something that they actually enjoy. So the ultimate, look and feel of it might change over time as I try and reach that goal.
Sure. So you kind of got on board the gig economy train really before it, kind of spread and became a larger thing. What have you observed over these last several years about how the gig economy has perhaps morphed and changed?
Yeah, actually, I love that question. I think the gig economy as it stands today it's not sustainable. I think there are a couple of reasons for that. I think first, even just U.S. tax law around employees and contractors, they're essentially two different, options, right? And unfortunately, if you're an independent contractor, that usually means you don't get things like benefits or paid time off or disability insurance or vacation. And so I really believe ultimately that there should be a third option, maybe more, but a third option for, what I imagine is almost like a credits-based system. So maybe you're an independent contractor or a freelancer or a gig worker, but you still have access to really life-saving benefits like health insurance or dental insurance. And so I think that what I see today is that the gig economy, when we see things like Instacart strikes or Uber and Lyft strikes, it's because, folks are saying, hey, the way that it stands right now is not sustainable. And unfortunately, we've seen really that very vulnerable population of gig workers suffer the most during this coronavirus pandemic. And so I don't have a ton of resources to make it what I want it to be today, but I really do imagine there being sort of a third option that's more sustainable.
So how many folks do you have in your network right now?
We have a little over 10,000 people on the site. The majority of the registered users came to us through an app called Steady, which is a a joint venture between Shaquille O'Neal and a guy named Adam Roseman. So I believe they're based out of Atlanta, and really we have a shared goal. The reason it's called Steady is that they believe that gig workers and freelancers should be able to have a steady income. Most of these people are supporting children, oftentimes as a single parent, and actually the majority of folks are already working. So we're talking about working 2-3 different jobs. And then the numbers that they've seen through their app is 27% of their registered users who are reflective of our registered users. 100% of their income went away overnight in March. And then another 50+% of their people saw at least 50% of their income gone overnight. And so it's not sustainable. You have children to support, you have bills to pay. And I know that there are some, kind of patchwork solutions out there, like unemployment and things like that, allowing gig workers to finally access benefits, but it's not sustainable.
No,
And it's not good
yeah,
for
it
our
isn't, and
communities.
yeah, and we've kind of known that all along, right? I mean, we've known that. I mean, these sheer numbers are not sustainable in terms of the levels of unemployment. The job losses that the economy has sustained thus far. It's in some ways it's unlike anything else we've ever seen prior, right? This is an unprecedented situation, and so I think a lot of people are trying to figure out how to manage it. On this show in particular, I've had a lot of conversations with people that have come to a realization that even if they have a job, like you said, they might be doing something, they might be running the business part-time, full-time, whatever it is. Regardless, I hear a lot of people talking about they need multiple streams of revenue. It seems like that is, above anything else, kind of the going reality for most folks nowadays.
Yeah.
Would you say that? Would you see that from your folks that are part of My People Now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't cite the source right now off the top of my head, but I did recently read something that said that essentially folks that have multiple streams of revenue are the ones that are able to sort of recover or sustain themselves the most right now. And just, again, listening to the CEO of Steady talk, over the last couple of weeks, it's really right now, this is a middle class. A lot of people in the middle class are experiencing things like joblessness for the first time, whereas a lot of folks that have I hate to say it, but almost used to poverty, that they're kind of used to figuring out these, how to sustain themselves. And so we're seeing it impact people who have never been hit by this. And so, yeah, everybody's responding a little bit differently. But yeah, I think, I think it was from, I read that in 2020, so this year, it's expected that 45% of all full-time workers have a side hustle. And that number is expected to reach 65% by 2030. And so I think it's just kind of the way that the future is going to go, is that people really will have multiple streams of income.
Now, in your case, I mean, you're running the business full time. Is that correct?
Yes,
But then you also have another source of income through your husband, right?
I do. Yes.
So that's been able to help sustain you guys in your household during this time. But you just touched on something really important there about the station in life that people have. If they've been used to poverty, that therefore means that you've kind of been used to having to sort of struggle, and at the same time to be resourceful and resilient, to have to try to figure things out to survive any way that you can. I think from our conversations before, my understanding is you've had some experience having to do that yourself. Is that right?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up my husband, only from the standpoint that I tell people often that my path out of poverty should not be marrying up. And unfortunately, when I look around, I'm heavily connected to the female founder community in the Seattle area. And unfortunately, what I see a lot of is a lack of economic diversity in the startup ecosystem. So even though there's some strides being made by women founders that are fantastic, oftentimes those strides are made by women founders who are married to people that have money that can help sustain their business venture. And so I was born into poverty. We were on, I was one of 5 kids, and we were on welfare and food stamps and Section 8 our entire lives. in the Bay Area. So it's an expensive place to be poor. But then, got pregnant at 16 and then went on welfare myself after my son was born. And then, have kind of been in and out of that as an adult. And so, I bring that up because I really believe that whether it's women or any other people that struggle with economic dependence, that their path out should be self-driven, that they should be able to achieve that on their own, and that there should be resources that support that. And so that's what I really, really hope to bring about with My People Now, because it's what I needed. So yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Melissa, because it raises a really important point, especially right now. Obviously, race is kind of at the forefront of many conversations right now with everything that's happening nationally.
Yeah.
And you and I started to talk about this the last time we spoke. And so I'm hoping you can touch on it more now. Just the idea of privilege and what it is that means. Because I think you'll have people on either side that will say that, what we're seeing right now is not so much results of a race problem as it is more of a class problem. Like we're more of a classist based society. What would you say to those folks?
I would say absolutely not. Let me put it this way. It's taken me a long while, growing up, I would, when I would hear the term privilege or white privilege, I would think, privilege, I know I was poor and I was a single mom, and my great grandparents were Hungarian Jewish refugees, and no privilege, no. And it's taken me a long time to get there, even as a sociology student. It's taken me so long to realize that, yeah, there are layers of privilege, right? But race, my appearance has had a lot to do with my ability to get out of poverty during the different times where I have. And so, I shared something the other day on Facebook, a sort of a video, highlighting my sort of rags to riches, story, if you will, has gotten 85,000 views on YouTube. And I thought, and I put in my posts, I said, getting out, poverty is not doled out evenly in our society by any means. And the fact that I've been able to get out of it with relative ease, even after, domestic violence issues and different things, maybe it takes me a month or two, right, to find my footing. And then I get, I get to go off and get jobs and do all these different things that let me put it this way. When I arrived to Seattle and I stayed in a domestic violence shelter, I was the only white woman there. I was, and I got out of that place within a matter of weeks. And I knew that absolutely had a role to play. And so, yeah, let me, make no mistake about it. There are many, many, many poor white people in the United States and around the world. But race absolutely, has, the numbers just show that poverty impacts people of color at a much higher rate. And so, yeah, I don't have all the answers and wisdom, but I need to stay conscious and aware of how it affects people differently, because I can go, write some book about, how I did it. And that's not to say that anybody could pick up that book and do the same thing that I did and expect the same results at all.
Yeah, certainly. And I'm glad that you brought up that distinction. Like to your point, there are varying degrees of privilege, most certainly. But when I tend to think of privilege in a certain way, to me, I think it means, like for most white folks in America, you have the privilege of not having to think about your skin color or your race in most interactions. Yeah. So I think, when I think of privilege, that's a lot of what I think of. Yes, there are some economic components to it as well. But it's just like you said. I mean, there are a lot of poor white people as well as poor black people in this country. I mean, growing up in the area of the city where I grew up in Indianapolis, I mean, we had a mixture of poor black, brown, white. We had a conglomeration of folks that were all sort of at the same economic level. And yet within there's again sort of varying degrees of privilege. So it's perhaps an oversimplification to simply make it just about economics.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And yet, right, we are seeing some strides, it would seem, right now, in terms of thinking about what business means, particularly for communities of color. You're working with My People Now. You're creating sort of environment for folks to make inroads to the gig economy, to hopefully help use that as a pathway to sustainability for them. What is that process going to look like moving forward?
Yeah, so that's an important question, and I have read every single profile on our site. Like I said, over 10,000. I've read all the stories. I've looked at all the pictures. I've read all the listings. I would actually venture to say that the majority of the people that are on our site are people of color, and I don't have exact statistics on that, but I constantly feel, let me just say, inadequate in terms of being able to help be a part of that solution for the folks on our site. And I've recently made the decision that I can't do this alone, just with my own thinking and my own experience of getting out of poverty. I absolutely need representation, on our board, in our executive level positions, on our staff. And I would even go as far as saying that I refuse to operate without that diversity in our team, because it would be stupid. It would be reckless, and I wouldn't be able to help as much as I want to. And so what I really see happening, and what I I'm a little bit slower than I would like to be, because this pandemic has meant that I have 5 kids at home full time. And that
Yeah, that's
hasn't
that's
been
real.
easy.
That's
Hasn't
real.
been easy, but let me put it this way. My plan of action is to identify folks who have the experience and the wisdom that I need. And I say that first, because this is in no way is this me saying I'm going to go out and identify people of color and say, hey, I want you on my team specifically because of the color of your skin. No, I want to identify the wisdom, the skills, the experience, the passion that I need on our team. And then I want to make sure that I have a diverse representation on our team that can help take us there. And I think I've done a good job at identifying a few folks, but I need to broaden my my horizons and make sure that I think I'll be more successful. And here's the thing, Ethan, and it's sad to say that you even have to come up with like a selfish bottom line reason for diversity, but the data is very clear that with diversity, you're actually more likely to succeed and more likely to be profitable. And if it takes that being the reason that companies are now going to go out and specifically diversify their teams, okay, so be it. But there's a business case for it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, all of that makes sense. So kind of walk me through your strategy, say over the next, 60, 90 days, as I mean, everything's still kind of going on with the coronavirus, and yet some things are sort of getting back to normal. What are you going to be working on? What are you going to be focusing on?
Yeah, so the number one thing I want to focus on and work on is actually talking to the people on our site. So I haven't done enough of that. I have to admit to somewhat being, I don't know, afraid. I guess afraid of people just coming to me and saying, "Hey, this site sucks. It's terrible." I haven't been able to make a bunch of money on it. Something like that, right? But it has to start there. And in fact, I think the most important questions I can have are going to be with people on the site who have said, hey, I signed up, I filled out all this information, I'm not seeing business from it. And I need to kind of with them get to a point where I'm figuring out why that is. And so one of the things that I really feel like my hunch is telling me is that we have a trust issue, in our society, right? And I get people all the time who say, "Oh, well, where are the background checks on your site?" And I put it this way: until we have a judicial system that is not racist, in my opinion, then I will never do background checks on our site. Because I guarantee you that if we do background checks on our site, that we're going to end up getting people look, there are people who have records, because of the war on drugs and different things like that, that have absolutely no bearing on their ability to provide good services to the people in our community. And so one of the biggest things that I would like to do is essentially have what I call social validation. So maybe you don't have the work experience, maybe you don't have the degree, maybe you don't have the background, but maybe you could prove that you are actually good at what you do and that you have a few friends who are willing to vouch for you. I think that's good enough. And so I want to start talking to the people that are on our site, and then come up with a solution for both sides. Essentially, what needs to happen? What does a profile need to contain that helps the clients on our site see that they can actually make a leap of faith and hire somebody for a job that they need done. And so, yeah, that's one of the biggest things. The next thing, though, is, like I said, that we've morphed into an employee engagement platform. And so the reason I bring that up is, when, I mentioned that I was in a shelter for a little while when I arrived in Seattle. And while I was on that shelter bed with the YWCA, I applied for a job at Zillow. I got that job. And that did have a big role to play in me getting out of poverty at that time in my life. I was the #1 rep on my team of 18 people for an entire year. I did incredibly well, but I felt incredibly alone and isolated. And I felt that I was in a company that was filled with people who had economic privilege for a long time, who couldn't really relate to the fact that, I had just gotten out of a really, really bad relationship. B, I was a single mom. I had just gotten out of homelessness. And I needed some friends who understood what that was like. And that's why we have morphed this into an employee engagement platform, because I really believe that when people find their people that they can be their honest, complete selves around, that they're actually more likely to be productive at work, to be happier at work, more likely to stay on the payroll. And I've talked to some folks who have told me that even though companies are making strides to hire a diverse range of candidates, they're struggling with getting those candidates to stay after a year or two. And I really believe that problem goes hand in hand with belonging and inclusion. So you might have, the people on the staff, right? But if they don't feel like their voice belongs or is heard or validated or respected, you hear things about microaggressions all the time. Those things could be serious enough to make someone actually want to leave their job, and understandably so. And so that's what I want to do, is create a system, for workplaces to say, okay, we want to hire diverse candidates. We want to retain them on our payroll. We want them to be happy. We want them to be productive. But how do we do that if essentially we're just creating these silos of these, ERGs or employee resource groups, where it's like, okay, great, we have an indigenous peoples group over here. So, hang out over here and get to know each other and support one another. There's a place for that. That's necessary. But then how are you going to actually intermingle or cross-pollinate across economic lines, racial lines, gender lines, unless you're actively making that happen for people?
Well, I think that's a great initiative that you're working on, Melissa. I love hearing about that. I love hearing about just the idea of using social currency as a way to have other people vouch for folks. I mean, that's something that we just do all the time. I mean, Airbnb uses that to help vet whether or not they might accept a guest at their place of their vacation or their place of residence, right? So we have those tools in place already. Social media helps move that along even further. So I think those tools are great. I love to hear about what you're talking about. Real quick, can you just tell everybody how do we find out about your company?
Yeah, so I think I've secured almost every handle I can that says at MyPeopleNow. So MyPeopleNow.com is our website. I'd encourage people to not judge the site by what you see yet. I think there's a lot in store for what I want it to look like, and even more importantly, if someone has an idea for for how they want to change the gig economy, for how they want to work on diversity and inclusion in the corporate world. Because the future of work, the reason we talked about these things like stats about people having multiple sources of revenue is that the reason why we want to marry gig workers and corporate workers together is that that's where the future is headed. And so if someone has other ideas that maybe I haven't thought of, or they want to be a part of that, reach out to me, Melissa at MyPeopleNow.com, or on social media. I can't do this alone, and I know there are a lot of bright ideas out there that I haven't even considered yet. So yeah.
Melissa Strawn, thanks very much for being with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you very much.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the podcast. Head on over to grassrootsgig.com where you can check out more interviews, read the latest blogs, and join a community of grassroots changemakers. Be sure to follow us on social media and subscribe to our channel to keep up with the latest. We'll see you next time.